It was a quiet Monday morning at the city hospital, one of those days when the sun was already warm, and the line of people outside the main entrance stretched around the corner. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The lobby buzzed with movement. Nurses pushing carts, patients filling out forms, families sitting nervously on plastic chairs. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go or something urgent to do. At the reception desk, a nurse in a crisp white uniform typed rapidly on her computer. Her name tag read, Nurse Karen. She had worked at the hospital for almost 12 years and liked to think she could tell who belonged where just by looking. Every morning, she'd straighten her papers, sip her coffee, and quietly judge the crowd that walked through the doors. To her, the hospital had a certain order. Certain people fit that order and others didn't. That morning, a woman walked in who immediately caught her attention. She was a black woman in her mid-40s, dressed simply in slacks and a pale blouse. Her hair was neatly tied back and she carried a folder under her arm. She looked calm, dignified, but not flashy. She didn't wear a badge or a name tag like the doctors usually did. To most people, she might have looked like just another visitor. The woman walked up to the counter and smiled kindly. "Good morning," she said softly. "I have an appointment." Karen didn't smile back. She barely looked up from her screen. "Do you have insurance?" she asked flatly. The woman blinked, taken slightly aback. "Yes, I do," she replied. "But I actually—" Karen interrupted. "We're not taking walk-ins today. You'll have to go to the community clinic down the street. They handle people without prior registration." The woman's expression stayed calm, though a hint of confusion crossed her face. "I think there must be some misunderstanding," she said. Karen cut her off again, this time with a little more sharpness in her tone. "Ma'am, we're very busy. If you don't have an appointment in the system, there's nothing I can do. You can check the public clinic or urgent care. They're better equipped for—" She paused mid-sentence as if searching for a polite way to finish, but her tone carried the unspoken message. "For people like you." The woman's lips pressed together gently. "I see," she said quietly. "Could you just check my name, please? It should be in the system." Karen sighed, irritated. "Fine," she said, typing lazily into the computer. "Name?" "Angela Morris." Karen typed it in, tapping the keyboard with exaggerated slowness. After a few seconds, she frowned. "Nothing's showing," she said, closing the screen. "You're not in the system." Angela nodded, though she didn't seem surprised. "That's all right," she said in a calm, even tone. "Maybe it hasn't been updated yet. I just need to see someone from administration." "It's important." Karen crossed her arms. "Administration? You mean billing?" Angela smiled politely. "No, not billing. The main office." Karen's eyebrows rose slightly. "The main office? You can't just walk in there. You need clearance." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but you can't just walk around this hospital like that. We have procedures." A few people sitting in the waiting area had started watching. An older man glanced up from his newspaper. A mother holding her child looked away awkwardly. The tension in the air felt thick, uncomfortable. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you." Then she turned and walked toward the hallway that led deeper into the building. Karen called out behind her, "Ma'am, you can't go back there. That area is for staff only." But Angela didn't stop. She kept walking with calm steps, her heels tapping lightly against the floor. Karen stood there fuming, her cheeks hot. She muttered under her breath, "Some people think they can just go anywhere." A younger nurse who had been organizing charts nearby looked uneasy. "Maybe she really does have an appointment," she said softly. Karen shot her a glance. "Don't be naive. I've seen this before. People show up thinking they can skip the line. You have to be firm, or everyone will walk all over you." The young nurse didn't reply, but the doubt in her eyes said she wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, Angela made her way down the hallway. Every few steps, staff members passed her. Some nodded, some smiled politely. She returned each greeting warmly. The deeper she went, the quieter it got. The smell of coffee faded, replaced by the sterile scent of the upper administrative wing. At the end of the corridor was a door marked Director's Office. Angela reached into her folder and took out her ID badge, clipped it neatly onto her blouse and walked in. Inside, her assistant stood up immediately. "Good morning, Dr. Morris," he said. "You're here earlier than expected?" Angela smiled. I came through the main entrance today, she said softly. Thought I'd see how things look from a visitor's view. Her assistant looked puzzled for a moment, but then noticed the calm seriousness in her expression. I take it you saw something. Angela nodded slowly. I saw enough. Back at the front desk, Karen was still irritated. She couldn't believe the nerve of that woman, walking past her like she owned the place. She turned to another staff member, shaking her head. You know, people need to understand boundaries. This is a hospital, not a bus station. We can't have just anyone wandering the halls. The staff member shrugged uncomfortably. Still, maybe you could have asked a bit more. She seemed polite. Karen frowned. Polite doesn't mean anything. You have to be alert. If I stopped to chat with everyone who came in, this place would fall apart. Just then, her supervisor walked by. Karen, you've been here since 6, right? Go take a break. I'll cover for 10 minutes. Karen forced a smile. Thanks. I could use a coffee. She left the desk and went to the staff lounge, muttering under her breath about how people never followed rules anymore. Inside the lounge, a few other nurses sat chatting. One of them was scrolling through her phone. Hey, did you hear? She said excitedly. The new hospital director's starting this week. Supposed to be one of the youngest directors this place has ever had. Came from the regional branch, I think. Karen perked up. Oh, great, she said sarcastically. Another one of those corporate types who thinks they can fix everything. The others chuckled, but one nurse, an older man who had seen many directors come and go, shook his head. I heard she's not like that. Very hands-on. They say she's been visiting departments quietly, just observing how staff treat people. Karen rolled her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? We do our jobs just fine. The man shrugged. It means she wants to see how people behave when they don't know who's watching. Karen laughed, dismissing the comment. Well, she won't find anything wrong with me. I run a tight ship. The others exchanged glances but didn't say anything. The conversation drifted to other topics. Shift schedules, cafeteria food, the usual complaints. But that small warning stayed in the back of Karen's mind, though she didn't want to admit it. A few hours later, the morning rush had died down. The lobby was quieter now. Karen had returned to her desk, sipping her second cup of coffee, scrolling through patient records. Then she noticed movement near the elevator. The same woman, the one from earlier, was walking out, this time wearing a hospital ID clipped neatly to her blouse. Karen froze, confused. The woman walked past the waiting area, talking quietly with a doctor who appeared to be showing her some documents. A few staff members nodded respectfully as she passed. Karen's mouth went dry. Who is that? She whispered to the young nurse beside her. The nurse looked at her with wide eyes. That's Dr. Morris, she said. The new hospital director. Karen's coffee cup nearly slipped from her hand. The director? She repeated, her voice a faint whisper. The young nurse nodded. Yeah, she was introduced at the staff meeting last week. Didn't you read the memo? Karen's face went pale. Her mind replayed the morning in sharp detail. The tone of her voice, the dismissive words, the way she told her to try the public clinic. Her stomach twisted. She watched as Dr. Morris smiled at a patient sitting nearby, stopping to ask if they were being helped. Her kindness was effortless, genuine. Karen looked down at her desk, her pulse racing. The words she'd said echoed like a drumbeat in her head. You can't just walk around this hospital like that. She swallowed hard. Maybe, she thought. Maybe Dr. Morris didn't recognize her. Maybe she'd forgotten already. But deep down she knew that wasn't true. The look in Dr. Morris's eyes when she left the desk, calm, steady, unshaken, it wasn't the look of someone who forgot. It was the look of someone who remembered everything. Later that afternoon, Karen sat quietly in the break room again. She stirred her coffee, barely tasting it. The conversation from earlier about the new director replayed in her head. She thought about what the older nurse had said. She wants to see how people behave when they don't know who's watching. Now she understood. Every word she had said that morning came back like a mirror being held up in front of her. The tone she used, the assumptions she made, the small dismissive gestures she didn't even think twice about. She'd always told herself she wasn't unfair, that she treated everyone equally, that she was just following the rules. But maybe for the first time, she realized how those rules sounded when spoken to someone who didn't deserve that tone. The lounge felt quiet, heavier than usual. The laughter from the other nurses in the hallway seemed far away. She didn't know what Dr. Morris planned to do, or whether she'd bring it up. But a part of her already felt the weight of what she'd done. And somewhere down the hall in the director's office, Dr. Morris was having a quiet conversation with her assistant about what she'd seen that morning, not with anger, but with resolve. She knew that small moments like these revealed more about a hospital than any report or policy ever could. She had walked through those doors to see how people treated strangers. Now she knew exactly where to start. That night, long after the hospital had quieted down, the echo of that morning still lingered in both women's minds. For Karen, it was a sinking realization that her habits had finally caught up with her. For Angela, it was a reminder of why she had taken this job in the first place, to make sure that no one, no matter their background or appearance, ever felt small in a place meant for healing. Outside, the city lights glowed softly against the dark sky. Inside the hospital, the machines hummed. The night shift began, and the quiet promise of change hung in the air, though neither of them could yet see how deeply that morning's encounter would shape what came next. The next morning, the hospital felt different. It was hard to say exactly what had changed, maybe the air, maybe the tension in the halls, but something subtle lingered. The early shift nurses chatted softly over coffee, glancing toward the main office now and then. Whispers had begun to spread since the new director's arrival. Everyone knew a change in leadership could shake things up, but this time it felt personal. People were curious about the new director. Some said she was kind but firm. Others claimed she'd been walking through departments quietly, watching how patients were treated. At the front desk, Karen sat stiffly, staring at her monitor but barely typing. She hadn't slept much the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the moment she told Dr. Morris to try the public clinic. The memory burned in her chest like embarrassment and guilt mixed together. She kept telling herself that she hadn't meant any harm. She was only doing her job, following rules. But the truth was harder to ignore now. The look on Dr. Morris's face, calm, patient, yet piercing, stayed with her. It wasn't anger, but disappointment, and somehow that was worse. She'd thought about going to the director's office to apologize, but every time she imagined it, her throat tightened. What if Dr. Morris was furious? What if she reported her to administration? Or worse, what if she didn't even care enough to remember? That last thought hurt more than she expected. Across the hall, a group of nurses whispered near the vending machine. One of them noticed Karen and lowered her voice. "That's her," she said. "The one who turned away the director." Karen heard the words, even though they were spoken softly. She pretended not to notice, keeping her eyes fixed on the computer screen. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, even though she wasn't entering anything important. She wished she could rewind the day. If she'd just taken an extra minute to listen, to look up, to ask a simple question instead of assuming, everything would be different. But now it was too late. Meanwhile, Dr. Morris was in a meeting upstairs with her assistant and a few department heads. She listened carefully as each of them gave updates on patient numbers, staff rotations, and new policy drafts. She nodded thoughtfully but said little. Her mind wasn't just on the numbers. It was on what she'd seen the day before. After the meeting ended, her assistant lingered behind. "You're thinking about yesterday, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Angela smiled faintly. "You know me too well." He hesitated. "Do you plan to say something to her?" "Not yet," she said. "People show who they are when they don't know they're being watched. I need to see how she behaves when she thinks no one's paying attention." The assistant nodded. "That's fair. But she looked pretty shaken when she realized who you were." Angela sighed softly. "Good, maybe that means she's thinking. Sometimes reflection does more than punishment." She looked out the window, watching the city below. "Hospitals are built on trust," she said after a moment. "Not just between patients and doctors, but between everyone who walks through these doors. If one person feels unwelcome, we all fail." Her assistant nodded quietly, impressed by her calm conviction. "You plan to visit the lobby again?" Angela smiled. "Soon, but not as the director this time." Downstairs, the morning passed slowly. Karen checked in a few patients, answered phones, and tried to stay focused. Every now and then, she caught people glancing her way. Whether it was her imagination or gossip spreading, she couldn't tell. Around noon, she went to the cafeteria to grab lunch. The tables were half full, filled with staff in scrubs, paramedics on break, and a few office workers. She carried her tray to an empty corner, hoping for peace. She'd barely started eating when two nurses sat at the next table. They didn't notice her right away. One of them said, "I heard the director came through the ER last night. She talked to patients directly." The other nurse nodded. "Yeah, she's checking how people are treated at all levels. Some folks are nervous. They say she's taking notes." Karen froze mid-bite. Notes? Was she writing down names? The first nurse continued. "She's not here to fire people, though. I think she just wants to see who's genuine." Karen exhaled slowly. Maybe there was still hope. Maybe Dr. Morris didn't hold grudges. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. Every hallway she walked through now felt like it had eyes. Every polite smile from a coworker seemed to hide a question. What did you really say to her? That afternoon, Angela stepped out of her office again. She left her white coat behind and changed into a simple sweater and slacks. Without the director badge, she looked like any visitor. She walked down the corridors quietly, watching interactions at the desks, listening to conversations. At the pediatric wing, she saw a nurse kneel to speak gently to a scared child. In the waiting area, a janitor stopped to help an elderly woman pick up her dropped bag. Small moments of kindness, the kind that rarely made it into reports but mattered the most. When she returned to the lobby, Karen was still at the desk, her posture stiff, eyes glued to the computer screen. A patient, a man in his 50s, stood in front of her looking confused. "Sir, you need to fill this out online," Karen said impatiently. "I don't have a phone," the man said quietly.
"Can I fill it here?"
Karen sighed loudly, tapping her pen. "I already told you everything's digital now. You'll need someone to help you." Angela watched silently from a few feet away. Her expression didn't change, but her heart sank. She'd hoped that maybe yesterday had been a misunderstanding, that the nurse was just having a bad morning. But now she could see the pattern. She stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said kindly, turning to the man. "You can use the kiosk over there. I'll show you." The man smiled gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am." Karen looked up in surprise. When she saw who it was, her breath caught for a second. Angela met her eyes briefly but said nothing. She just guided the man to the corner where a self-service screen stood, patiently explaining how to fill out his details. After the man thanked her and walked away, Angela turned back to the desk. Her tone remained calm. "Nurse Karen, do we have anyone assigned to assist people who need help with the new system?" Karen hesitated. Not exactly. It's supposed to be self-explanatory." Angela nodded slowly. "Maybe for some. But not everyone has the same access or confidence with technology. Remember, compassion doesn't always follow the same procedure." Her voice wasn't angry, and it was soft, almost gentle. But each word landed with quiet weight. Karen nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "You're right." Angela smiled faintly. "I know it's not easy working at the front desk. You see everyone, the tired, the frustrated, the scared. But that's also where real care begins. It's not just about who gets a form first. It's about how people feel when they're here." She didn't wait for a response. She simply said, "Thank you for your time," and walked away. Karen sat there, frozen, her face burning. The rest of the day dragged on. Every tick of the clock felt heavier than the last. Karen couldn't focus. She kept hearing the director's voice in her mind, calm, understanding, but piercingly clear. When her shift finally ended, she walked out to the parking lot, the sun already dipping behind the tall buildings. She sat in her car for a long time before turning on the engine. She thought about her years at the hospital. She'd worked hard, no doubt. Long hours, stressful nights, countless patients. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing people as individuals. They'd become cases, forms, and checkboxes. Efficiency had replaced empathy. And now, for the first time, someone had held up a mirror. Over the next few days, the hospital buzzed with quiet tension. Everyone knew the director was observing things personally. Some employees tried extra hard to be polite, while others just tried not to get noticed. But there was something different about Dr. Morris's approach. She wasn't walking around with a clipboard or taking notes in front of anyone. She simply talked to people, patients, staff, even janitors, asking how they felt, what could be improved, what they needed. Her presence didn't feel like supervision. It felt like someone genuinely listening, and that slowly began to change the mood of the place. In the cafeteria, people began greeting each other more warmly. At the front desk, the young nurse who worked beside Karen started smiling more at patients. Even the security guard at the entrance began offering directions instead of pointing silently. Karen noticed it all. Each act of kindness reminded her of what she'd lost in her own approach. She wanted to change, but she didn't know how to begin. One afternoon, while she was organizing files, the young nurse beside her leaned over. "You know," she said softly, "the director's visiting every department next week to meet everyone officially." Karen nodded, her stomach tightening. "I heard." "She's not the kind of person who holds grudges," the young nurse continued. "If you just talk to her honestly, I think she'll respect that." Karen gave a small, nervous smile. "I hope you're right." Later that evening, when the lobby was almost empty, Karen finally gathered the courage to walk to the director's office. The hallway felt longer than usual. Her shoes echoed against the polished floor as she approached the door with the golden nameplate. Dr. Angela Morris, Director of Operations. She stood there for a full minute, heart pounding before softly knocking. A calm voice answered, "Come in." Karen opened the door slowly. Dr. Morris looked up from her desk, surprised but not unkindly. "Good evening," she said. "You're still here?" Karen swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "I wanted to speak with you if you have a moment." Angela set aside her papers. "Of course." "Please sit." Karen sat down, her hands clasped tightly. For a moment she couldn't find the words. Then with a shaky breath she began. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, "for how I treated you that morning. I didn't recognize you and I made assumptions I shouldn't have. I was rude and I was wrong." Angela listened without interrupting. Her expression stayed calm but thoughtful. Karen continued, her voice softer now. "I've been in this job so long I forgot what it feels like to be on the other side of the counter. I see people come in every day, angry, scared, tired, and I just stopped seeing them as people. That's not what I meant to become." For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the ceiling vent. Then Angela spoke gently. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "That takes courage." Karen looked up, surprised. "You're not angry?" Angela smiled faintly. "No, disappointed, yes, but not angry. I've been in your shoes before. I know how easy it is to get lost in rules and routines. But change starts with awareness, and that's what you've shown today." Karen nodded slowly, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said softly. Angela leaned back slightly. "You can help me with something," she added. "I'm starting a new patient care program. It focuses on improving frontline communication, empathy, listening, first impressions. I'd like you to be part of it." Karen blinked in surprise. "Me?" Angela nodded. "Who better to teach others what not to repeat and how to grow from it?" For the first time in days, Karen smiled, a genuine one. "I'd like that," she said quietly. Angela extended her hand across the desk. "Then let's begin from here." As Karen shook her hand, she felt something shift, not just in her job, but in herself. That night, as she walked out of the hospital, the city lights reflected off the windows, and the world outside seemed a little brighter. She knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild trust or change habits overnight, but she finally had a direction. For the first time in a long while, she didn't dread coming back tomorrow. And upstairs in her office, Dr. Morris watched the lobby cameras briefly before turning off the monitor. She smiled faintly. Change had begun, not through fear but through understanding, and that, she thought, was how real healing started. The following week came faster than anyone expected. The hospital was buzzing with quiet energy, like the air before a storm. Word had spread that the new director would officially visit each department, not just to introduce herself, but to talk about new policies and the hospital's vision for the future. Everyone was nervous. Even those who had only heard about her once or twice now spoke her name with a mix of respect and fear. Some whispered that she was strict, while others said she was incredibly kind. The truth was, no one knew what to expect, except Karen, who had already seen both sides of her. Since their talk in the office, Karen had been different. She didn't snap at people anymore. She looked up when patients approached, smiled more often, and spoke softly even when the line was long. The young nurse beside her noticed the change and quietly admired it, but not everyone did. A few coworkers teased her gently in the break room, saying things like, "You're acting like an angel now," or trying to get in the director's good books. Karen never answered. She just smiled weakly and said, "No, just trying to do my job right." What she didn't say was that she'd been thinking deeply every night since that conversation. She thought about the times she'd been impatient with people who didn't understand the forms, the mothers who came in crying and scared, the elderly who moved slowly and made her feel rushed. She saw all those moments differently now. She saw herself in them, tired, frustrated, human. She realized the hospital wasn't just a place for the sick. It was a place where people's fears came to the surface, and she had been treating those fears like inconveniences instead of cries for help. So now she was trying to be better, slowly, quietly, sincerely. On Tuesday morning, the day of the official staff meeting, the hospital auditorium filled quickly. Nurses, doctors, clerks, janitors, everyone was required to attend. The seats were packed, the air full of anticipation. When Dr. Morris walked in, the room fell silent. She wasn't wearing her lab coat this time. She wore a simple navy blazer and a calm smile that carried authority without effort. Karen sat near the middle, her palms slightly sweaty. When the director walked past her row, their eyes met for a brief moment. Dr. Morris nodded once, not coldly, not overly warm, just enough to say she remembered. Then she took the stage. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I've been here for 2 weeks now. In that time, I've seen the best parts of this hospital, and I've seen areas where we can do better." She paused, letting the words settle. This isn't about numbers or reports. It's about people. Every single person who walks through those doors deserves dignity, whether they're a patient, a visitor, or a member of our staff. The audience listened closely. She spoke slowly, like every word was chosen with care. "Sometimes," she continued, "we forget that kindness is part of healthcare. We think it's enough to take blood pressure, give medicine, or type up reports. But what about the first smile a patient sees? The tone of voice they hear when they're scared? The way we treat them before we even know their name?" Karen felt her throat tighten. She knew those words weren't directed at her alone, but they hit deep. Dr. Morris looked around the room. "I came through this hospital anonymously before taking this job," she said. "I wanted to see how things really worked when no one was watching. I wanted to know how people are treated when they don't look like they belong here." A faint murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked at each other, realizing what she meant. "I met many kind faces," Dr. Morris said. "I also saw moments that reminded me why I accepted this position. Because change is needed not through punishment but through understanding." She smiled softly. "We all have room to grow, myself included. That's why we're introducing a new training program, one focused on empathy, communication, and the emotional side of patient care." A few people whispered to one another. Some looked nervous. Others looked relieved. Dr. Morris went on. "This program will start with a few volunteers from different departments who will help lead workshops and mentor others. It won't be about pointing fingers. It will be about learning together." Karen's heart pounded. She had a feeling she knew what was coming next. "And," Dr. Morris said, glancing in her direction, "our first volunteer is someone who has already shown what growth looks like, someone who made a mistake, faced it, and chose to change instead of hiding from it. Please welcome Nurse Karen from the front desk." A soft wave of surprise rippled through the room. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Karen froze. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her face went red and her hands shook slightly, but then she heard light applause. Not mocking, not forced, but genuine. She stood slowly, her voice small but steady. "Thank you," she said quietly, giving a small nod before sitting back down. Dr. Morris smiled warmly. "That's what leadership looks like," she said. "Not perfection, but accountability." The room stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then she continued with the rest of her speech, about teamwork, respect, and the hospital's new goals for patient satisfaction. When it ended, people clapped sincerely, not out of fear, but out of admiration. After the meeting, Karen stood in the hallway, still dazed. Several coworkers approached her, smiling kindly. "Good for you," one said. "That took courage." Another added, "Guess you're famous now." Karen laughed nervously. "Not sure that's the kind of fame I wanted." The young nurse from her desk came over and gave her a quick hug. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You handled that so well." Karen smiled. "Thanks. Honestly, I didn't expect her to do that." "She must really trust you," the young nurse said, "to put you in that position." Karen thought about that for a second. Maybe she was right. Later that day, She met with Dr. Morris and two other staff members in a small conference room to discuss the training program. The air felt different this time, not formal, not tense. Dr. Morris greeted everyone with a warm smile. "Thank you all for being here. This is where the real work begins." She outlined the plan, a series of workshops focused on empathy, active listening, and cultural awareness. They would use real experiences, the good and the bad, to help staff understand how small actions could make a big difference. Karen listened carefully, taking notes. At one point, Dr. Morris turned to her. "I'd like you to help design a session about first impressions," she said. "You see every patient who walks in. You understand the pressure and the mistakes that can happen when we rush." Karen nodded slowly. "I can do that." "I think it'll help me too," Dr. Morris smiled. "That's the idea." For the first time in a long time, Karen felt genuinely excited about her job. It wasn't just a paycheck anymore. It was a chance to make something right, not just for herself, but for others too. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. The first empathy workshop was held in one of the hospital's side rooms. At first, people came reluctantly, expecting another dull training session. But within minutes, the tone changed. They watched short role plays based on real hospital experiences. One showed a patient being dismissed for not understanding a form. Another showed a nurse taking an extra minute to comfort a frightened child. Dr. Morris asked the group simple questions afterward. "How did each scene make you feel? Which one reflects the kind of hospital we want to be?" The conversations that followed were honest, even emotional. Some staff admitted they'd lost patients too easily. Others shared stories of moments when kindness from a coworker had kept them going through hard shifts. Karen spoke up too. She told them about her first day meeting Dr. Morris, without mentioning titles, just calling her a woman who came to the desk. She described her assumptions, her tone, and how wrong she'd been. No one judged her. In fact, many nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "It happens to all of us," one nurse said softly. "We stop seeing people when we're tired." "That's why we have to remind each other," Karen replied. Every single day. Dr. Morris watched quietly from the back of the room, a small smile playing on her lips. This was exactly what she had hoped for. Real connection, not just compliance. Weeks passed. Slowly but surely, the hospital began to feel different. Patients noticed it too. They started writing thank you notes, praising how kind the staff had become. Complaints about rude behavior dropped sharply. Even small things changed. The receptionist kept candy for nervous children. Nurses took turns greeting patients by name, and a suggestion box appeared in the lobby labeled, "How can we make you feel cared for?" Karen read every note that came in. Some made her smile. Others made her think. But all of them reminded her that words and tone mattered just as much as medicine. One afternoon, Dr. Morris stopped by the front desk. Karen was helping an elderly man fill out a digital form on the tablet. She guided him patiently, explaining each step, making sure he understood. When she finished, the man smiled and said, "You've got a good heart, young lady." "Thank you," Karen laughed softly. "Just doing my job, sir." Dr. Morris, who had been watching quietly, stepped closer. "You've come a long way," she said when the man left. Karen smiled modestly. "Still learning every day," Angela nodded. "That's what keeps us human." They shared a brief silence, the comfortable kind that comes from mutual respect. Later that evening, as the hospital lights dimmed, Karen walked through the quiet halls on her way out. She passed by the same lobby where, weeks ago, she had told the director, not knowing who she was, to leave. Now, that same space felt different, warmer, brighter. She stopped for a moment, looking around. A patient was laughing with a nurse near the vending machine. The janitor was humming softly as he cleaned. The receptionist smiled at a woman holding a child. It was still the same hospital, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Karen took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "This is how it should have always been." As she walked out into the cool evening air, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. And in her office upstairs, Dr. Morris looked out the window, watching the last few staff members leave. She saw Karen step outside, pause for a moment, then walk away with calm confidence. The director smiled. Change, she thought, doesn't start with big speeches or written rules. It starts when one person chooses to care again, And at that moment she knew this hospital was finally on the right path. Months passed, and the hospital felt like a different place. The atmosphere had changed so much that even visitors noticed it. The walls hadn't changed color. The floors were the same machines beeped in the same rhythm. Yet the feeling was lighter. People greeted each other more often, smiled more easily, and even laughter could be heard from the nurses' station now and then. Karen had become one of the familiar faces everyone trusted. She wasn't just the woman behind the front desk anymore. She was the person people went to when they needed advice or someone to talk to. She didn't know when it happened exactly, but people started calling her the calm in the storm. Whenever the emergency room got too busy or the waiting area got crowded, Karen was the one who quietly stepped in to help things flow. Her patience had become contagious, but change, as she was learning, didn't happen in a straight line. Some days were still hard. Some people still carried the same old frustrations, the same sharpness in their tone. And one morning, all those lessons she had learned were put to the test. It started like any other day. A cool spring morning, the sun cutting through the glass doors, nurses chatting as they switched shifts. Karen took her seat at the front desk, adjusted her name badge, and began reviewing the patient list for the day. Everything seemed normal until, around mid-morning, the door swung open and a man stumbled in, holding his arm tightly. His jacket was torn and there was a line of red on his sleeve. Behind him, a young woman rushed in, her face pale with worry. "Please help him," she cried. "He fell while fixing something at the workshop." Karen jumped up immediately. "Sir, please come this way," she said, guiding them toward a chair. "Let me call someone to help you." But before she could pick up the phone, another voice cut through the air, sharp, impatient, and all too familiar. "What's going on here?" It was Nurse Brenda, one of the senior nurses from another shift. Brenda had been at the hospital longer than most people and was known for her efficiency and her temper. She wasn't cruel, but she didn't have much patience for what she called drama. Karen turned to explain. "He's hurt, looks like a deep cut." "I was just about to call triage," Brenda interrupted. "He should have gone to the urgent care, not here. We're full already." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Please, he needs help now. It's bleeding a lot." Brenda crossed her arms. "It's not life-threatening. We've got trauma cases in the back and 2 heart patients waiting for rooms. Sit tight, we'll get to you when we can." Karen could see the man swaying slightly, his face growing pale. She looked back at Brenda, trying to stay calm. "He's losing blood," she said softly. "Can we at least get someone to clean and wrap the wound until he's seen?" Brenda sighed, clearly annoyed. "Fine," she muttered. "But if another case comes in, he waits." "Got it," Karen nodded. "Got it." She led the man and the young woman to a small side room. As she helped him sit, she noticed the woman's hand shaking. "It's okay," Karen said gently. "You did the right thing bringing him here." When the man was finally taken to the back by another nurse, the young woman sat in the waiting area, holding her bag tightly. Karen offered her a cup of water. "He'll be okay," she said kindly. "The doctors will take care of him." The young woman looked up, eyes wet. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're the only one who listened." Karen smiled softly. "Everyone's just busy," she said. "But we try our best." She went back to her desk, but her mind stayed with that woman's words. "You're the only one who listened." It reminded her too much of that day months ago when she herself had been the one who didn't listen. Later that afternoon, Dr. Morris stopped by to check on the new mentorship program. She made it a point to walk around the hospital often, not just stay in her office. She said it helped her stay connected, to see what was really happening, not just what reports said. Karen updated her about the morning's rush, leaving out the details of the argument. But Dr. Morris could always tell when something was left unsaid. "Everything all right?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Karen hesitated. "Yes, mostly. Just a rough morning." One of the nurses was overwhelmed and said something sharp to a patient's family. Dr. Morris nodded slowly. "It happens." "What did you do?" Karen sighed. "I just tried to stay calm. I helped them and it worked out." "That's leadership," Dr. Morris said gently. "Not titles or authority, and just choosing compassion when others don't." Karen smiled at that. But inside she wondered, could she do more? Could she help others feel what she had learned without lecturing them? That question stayed in her mind for days. The following week, during one of the empathy workshops, Karen decided to share the story. She stood in front of the small group, a mix of nurses, clerks, and assistants, and spoke honestly. Sometimes, she began, we think we're being practical when we're actually being cold. We tell ourselves we don't have time to care, that we're too busy to comfort someone. But it takes just a few words to change everything for a person who's scared. She paused, looking around the room. Everyone was listening. She told them about the man who came in bleeding, how the young woman's voice trembled, and how being gentle had made all the difference. When she finished, one of the younger nurses raised her hand. I get what you mean, she said softly. Sometimes when I'm tired, I stop seeing people as people. They just become names on forms. Karen nodded. Exactly. That's when we need to remind ourselves that they're scared, not difficult. They're confused, not careless. Dr. Morris, who had joined quietly near the back, listened closely. She smiled faintly. These were the conversations she had dreamed of creating when she took the job. When the session ended, she approached Karen. That story you shared, she said. It'll stick with them. Karen looked surprised. You think so? I know so, Dr. Morris replied. People remember sincerity more than any slideshow. Not long after, something unexpected happened. The hospital received a letter from the city's health board, an invitation to participate in a new Compassion and Care campaign. It was an initiative meant to highlight hospitals that were working to improve patient relationships and emotional care. Dr. Morris decided to apply using the mentorship program as the hospital's contribution. When she told the team, Karen's name came up again. I'd like you to help present it, Dr. Morris said. You've lived this transformation from both sides. That's what people need to hear. Karen was speechless for a moment. Me? I'm not good at public speaking. You don't have to be perfect, Dr. Morris said kindly. You just have to be real. The day of the presentation arrived faster than expected. The event was held at a conference hall downtown, filled with doctors, nurses, and administrators from hospitals across the region. There were banners, lights, and even media coverage. Karen stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she held her note cards. She could hear the hum of voices from the crowd. Dr. Morris walked over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Just speak from your heart, she said. That's what got you here. When it was their turn, they stepped onto the stage together. Dr. Morris gave a short introduction about the hospital's journey, how they'd focused not just on technology or systems, but on human connection. Then she turned to Karen. And now, she said, one of our nurses will share her experience, a story of learning, humility, and change. Karen took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. The lights felt bright, the room too quiet. But then she remembered the faces of all the people she'd helped, and she began. At one point, she said softly, I thought being a nurse meant being efficient, moving fast, checking boxes, getting things done. But I forgot that behind every name was a person with fears, hopes, and stories. She paused, her voice steadying. One day I made a mistake. I spoke harshly to someone I thought was just another impatient visitor. I didn't know she was the hospital's new director, but more than that, I didn't realize how much my words could hurt. There was a soft murmur in the audience, Karen continued. That moment changed me, not because I got caught, but because she didn't humiliate me. She taught me. She showed me what compassion looks like, even when it's not deserved. And that's when I realized what kind of nurse I wanted to be. She told them about the new empathy workshops, about the stories shared by staff, about how the hospital had slowly transformed. When people feel cared for, she said near the end, they heal faster, not just in body, but in spirit. And when staff feel respected, they care better. It's a circle of kindness. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then applause filled the air. Dr. Morris smiled proudly, clapping along. After the event, people from other hospitals came up to talk to Karen. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others asked how they could start something similar. That night, back at the hospital, the staff surprised her with small handwritten notes taped around her desk. You made us proud. Your story reminded me why I became a nurse. You inspire more people than you know." Karen stood there reading them, tears filling her eyes. When Dr. Morris walked by, she said quietly, "Looks like your words are healing more than patients now." Karen laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I guess kindness really is contagious." The months that followed were some of the hospital's best. Patient satisfaction scores went up, but more importantly, morale improved. People started volunteering for extra workshops, suggesting new ways to comfort patients, and helping each other more. Even Brenda, the strict nurse, began to soften. One afternoon, Karen found her gently talking to a frightened elderly man, her tone warm and patient. When she caught Karen's surprised expression, she smiled awkwardly. "Don't look so shocked," Brenda said with a half grin. "People can change, right?" Karen laughed. "They sure can." One evening, as the sun set outside the tall glass windows, Dr. Morris gathered a small group of staff in the break room. There were cookies, coffee, and laughter. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "This hospital feels different now because of all of you. And it started with one small act of humility and courage." Everyone looked at Karen, who blushed deeply. "I just did what anyone could do," she said quietly. Dr. Morris shook her head. "You did what many people choose not to do. You learned, you changed, and you helped others do the same." The group raised their cups in a small toast. "To kindness," someone said. "To change," another added. Karen smiled. "To second chances," she said softly. That night, as she walked out into the quiet parking lot, the air cool and calm, she looked back at the hospital's glowing windows. For a long time, she stood there just watching. The building that had once been a place of stress now pulsing with something alive, something hopeful. And somewhere inside, she knew the lesson would stay with her forever. Respect isn't just about positions or titles. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, no matter who they are, because the person you ignore today might be the one who teaches you the most important lesson of your life tomorrow. And sometimes, that lesson changes everything. A year had passed since everything changed at the hospital. The building itself looked the same, but the feeling inside was completely different. The smell of coffee in the mornings mixed with quiet laughter. Nurses shared stories over lunch breaks. Patients smiled more often, and even the long waiting hours felt less heavy because the staff had learned how to make people feel seen. It was no longer just a hospital. It had become a place of healing in every sense: body, mind, and heart. Karen had grown into her new role naturally. Though she still worked at the front desk, her position now carried a deeper meaning. She wasn't just checking people in. She was the face of warmth, the first voice people heard when they walked through the doors. Sometimes Dr. Morris jokingly called her the heart of reception. But Karen never let the compliments get to her head. Every day she reminded herself how easily she could have lost her job that morning long ago. Every time someone smiled at her or thanked her for being kind, she silently thanked Dr. Morris for giving her a second chance. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when something unexpected happened. The hospital had settled into its calm rhythm. Karen was sorting out patient files, sipping her tea between calls. Then the doors opened, and a familiar face walked in, an older woman neatly dressed carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. She looked around the lobby, her eyes warm but searching. Karen stood up immediately. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The woman smiled. "Actually, I'm here to see Dr. Morris. Is she available?" Karen nodded. "I can check for you. May I ask your name?" "Lena," the woman said softly. "I'm her mother." Karen froze for a second, surprised. "Oh, of course. Please have a seat, ma'am. I'll call her right away." As she dialed the office, she couldn't help but smile. Dr. Morris's mother. Now that was someone she hadn't expected to meet. Within minutes, Dr. Morris came down the hall, her face lighting up when she saw her mother. "Mom!" she exclaimed, giving her a warm hug. Karen stepped aside, not wanting to interrupt. But before leaving, Dr. Morris's mother turned to her. Thank you, dear, she said gently. You have such a kind voice. Karen smiled shyly. You're very welcome, ma'am. After they walked off, Karen felt oddly emotional. She thought about how even directors, people who seemed so powerful, were still someone's child. They had families, emotions, and ordinary lives outside these walls. It was another quiet reminder that titles didn't define worth. Later that week, the hospital was preparing for something special, its annual Staff Appreciation Day. It was an event Dr. Morris had started to celebrate everyone who worked there, from doctors to janitors. There would be food, music, and a few short speeches. The staff was buzzing with excitement. Decorations were hung, tables set up in the cafeteria, and laughter echoed in the halls as people helped each other set things up. Karen was in charge of organizing part of the event. She made sure everyone got a small thank you card and that the new volunteers felt included. She'd even stayed late the previous night writing personal notes to a few staff members who had been struggling recently. By evening, everything was ready. The cafeteria was filled with bright lights, colorful banners, and the smell of fresh food. Dr. Morris took the microphone to open the event. This day isn't about awards, she said warmly. It's about appreciation.